And I just want to start off with just the first question, and that is, how does your Asian American identity or your relationship to that term really inform your approach and your work? And I'd love to start off with the fellows. If y'all can share maybe just a little bit in terms of how you're coming into this. So in no order, however, whoever wants to share first, Andy, Jason, or Suja.
The question was, how does my
how does your Asian American identity or your relationship to the term itself inform your work and your practice?
Yeah, I think that for me specifically, I'm Iranian American, and so I think first of all, there's a question like, is Iranian Asian? And I didn't know. The first person that encouraged me to get connect with ADOC was Nosheen Dadabhoy, and she was like, yeah, you should do it. And I was like, do I count? And she's like, yeah, you do, you should do it. And so I think that for me has been like Middle Easterner, as a Middle Eastern American, that has been kind of like, where do we fit in this big picture? And then I think secondly for me, the feature that I'm working on now, the title is Iranian Hillbilly. And that's about my story. About my dad is a Muslim immigrant from Iran. My mom is a Southern Baptist from Alabama, and I was raised in the Ozarks of Arkansas. And so it very much informs my work. And I think at some point in recent years, I kind of came full circle with just accepting that like I can be both. The lines can be blurry on my identity. I don't have to hide my Iranian side in the American presence, and I don't have to hide my American side in the Iranian presence. I can just be this mutt and be totally okay with the blurred lines.
Hi everyone. I always felt like I've been on the outskirts of being Asian American. I'm very proud to be Asian American now. There's a lot of shame around it growing up, but yeah, I don't feel like I fit the mold of what Asian American, like model minority, I was a caretaker when I was younger, and I lived with like a dozen foster families. I grew up all around the country with an undocumented single mother, and I always felt like I was never like fitting into the communities of like big Asian families like that connection that was felt there. And then now, it's with my documentary, EJ Lee All-American, it's been an exploration of that identity through my participant, because she's also a person who's been on the outskirts of Asian society. She has a Southern accent along with the Asian accent, immigrated, and through her, I've been really thinking about what that meant to me. So I'm interested in exploring the nuances, the messiness. I'm like a college dropout too, so I'm like, why am I up here? Yeah, so exploring all those parts of me. I don't feel like I'm an Asian American filmmaker. I am a filmmaker who is Asian American, and that's been, it's a little bit about me.
All right, so it's 3 o'clock, so I decided I should use some props. So I'm going to pull out some props. We haven't seen props so far during this. I know I don't look like the Statue of Liberty, but some people also don't think I look Asian American. So I got to tell you guys a story. So I went to law school at NYU. Here's my NYU hat. So I'm at NYU, first week of law school, right? And the Asian American students are like to me, hey, where were you last week? And I'm like, what do you mean, where was I? I'm like, where were you? We were all here. It was an orientation week for Asian Americans. I'm like, I wasn't invited. So I go to NYU, and I'm like, NYU, why wasn't I invited? And they're like, Suja, you're not Asian American. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm not Asian American? And they're like, you're the diversified majority. I'm like, what is that? So I actually pull out this map, right? And I'm like, India, it's in Asia. And then they were like, oh, Suja, you're right. India is in Asia. You are Asian American. And that's actually a true story. So I, a lot of like films use humor to tell stories. And so my film, One Angry Man, uses humor to tell an unknown story about the justice system. And in the film, I use humor, including dressing as the Statue of Liberty, to tell a story that I think is really important. And so most people don't know that instead of 12 people deciding, one person decides, and it's a really terrible system where less than 4% of cases go to trial. And I've been really mad about that for a lot of years right now. And so the film turns stereotypes upside down, like Jason's film does, where you have EJ as this Korean basketball player, and you've got Andy as Iranian, and also from the South. And so my film, I'm mad, and we don't think of a lot of people from the outside don't think of us as being mad. And I use humor, and a lot of people think of me as winning the spelling bee or being a doctor. They don't think of me as using humor. So all of our films, I think, are kind of turning stereotypes upside down. So yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm already kind of sensing some themes here, and just in terms of overall kind of representation, how we came into that identity forming. Thank you for the fellows for sharing that. I'd love to hear from this year's mentors. Same kind of question. How does your identity, specifically your Asian American identity, really shape and inform the way that you approach your work? And Jason, do you want to start?
Yeah, go ahead. So I think for me, it's been a big part of my career. So my first feature film started talking about post 9/11 and South Asians and Arabs and Muslims, and what happened to the Japanese after Pearl Harbor, and how the two connected with each other. So yeah, it's been, and every film that I've worked on included some themes to that. More recently, I work around disability and the Asian American community. So it's a big part of all my work.
So, I don't know if I thought about this question as I was starting to make work. So this is all sort of upon reflection, which I think is an interesting way to think about it. I'm a cultural hodgepodge. So I'm Bangladeshi American, but I've never lived in Bangladesh for more than a couple of months. And I also only lived in the US for 9 or 10 years before I moved and grew up in India and Nepal. And the first few years that I was making films, they were predominantly about regional working class white American communities. And when I think back on it, I think I was trying to understand something about American identity that, having moved back, sounding American and being seen as American, but that I was totally missing in my understanding of the culture. Like I missed 10 years of American culture. I was trying to get a grasp of again, and I think I still am in a way. And I think that the aspect of my identity that most has a bearing on my work as a filmmaker is coming from a Muslim background, because there's such a particular view of that background in the country that we live in. It feels like a constant barrage of stereotypes and expectations. And I had a very challenged relationship with that identity too, growing up. But I realized in more recent years that some of the aspects of the religion that were taught to me, even if I don't have a particularly robust traditional practice, really informed the way that I look at the world. And I appreciate that my family included that in the way they taught us about identity, that like Islam teaches an appreciation for the natural world, and it teaches you to look at the beauty that's just outside the frame, so to speak, and that I think about a lot.
Thank you. I didn't see myself as an Asian person or a Korean person when I was younger. I was adopted into a white American family and grew up in a white community, and actually grew up thinking I was white, which is a sad thing to say, but it wasn't until I graduated from college that I made a conscious decision actually to learn about what it meant to be Asian in the United States, and specifically what it meant to be a Korean person, because I grew up so racially isolated and just didn't know anything about my history. And when I made my initial forays into the Asian American community here in San Francisco, the community at the time, this is in the early 80s, the community that I discovered was primarily Japanese American and Chinese American, and there weren't stories that reflected my own experience then. But I really took an opportunity to dive into the narratives that were emerging from those communities, stories about the internment, about Angel Island, and dove into sort of the cultural productions of the time. And that really gave me the language to start articulating my own experience and understanding my own experience. And I think when I made my first film, so much of my first film, First Person Plural, which was made over 20 years ago, was about trying to recover and recuperate the erasure of my past and the erasure of my identity and history. And I think in retrospect, also I made a second personal film 10 years later. I think both of those films were a way for me to kind of claim a voice and create space within the Asian American identity for people like myself. Asian people who had been raised in non-Asian families, including white families and black families. And because I felt like that is part of the Asian diaspora.
Thank you for that. I want to invite the panel, if anyone says anything, feel free to kind of jump in and add to that. And also for the audience, be thinking about questions, because we're certainly going to open it up. Something I want to dig into a little bit more that came up in conversations with us is this twofold as Asian American filmmakers and storytellers of the pressure to be able to tell Asian stories, but also the desire to maybe want to tell other ones. So just like the provocative term in and of itself of limited, maybe it's not limited, but is there a burden or a sense of responsibility for Asian American filmmakers to only tell Asian American stories? Or is there a certain level of nuance and balance that you all are constantly having to kind of navigate as you're thinking about that? So just getting a little bit more into your actual work, how does that show up for you?
Yeah, for sure. People want you to do the thing that they see you as. And I think anybody who comes from a so-called marginalized community has this experience. If you're from this background, why don't you go make a movie about factory workers in Bangladesh? And I because of that, it's hard not to internalize that kind of pressure. And I felt that, again, the first movie I made was about an Appalachian community in Tennessee. And the night before I was feeling panicked that why aren't I serving my people? As opposed to there's something that this story has to offer, and that has to offer from my background, which will always include my identity as a Bangladeshi person. And in that particular case, I called my mom, and she said, the interesting thing about this story is that the resources are available in the community that you're filming in. In Bangladesh, it's a different kind of story. So what you're exposing is important, and I think there's always something there, and you have to make a case for this is the reason why you're the person to tell the story isn't necessarily always linked to your identity. But like you said, it's a double-edged sword. When being handed those stories or being asked to tell them, I'm well, I definitely want someone who looks like me to tell it, but maybe not me in this particular case. And I also think there are things that people want of you creatively and in terms of your approach, even if it is within the context of the story that they're asking for. So for example, it'd be harder if you come from where we come from to be allowed to tell, or to make an experimental film. Maybe that's not what people want from you.
So I really believe that we're not there yet, but we want to get to a place where it's not a burden to be able to tell these stories. So as a as an Asian American, but at the same time, we won't be able to tell those stories if we choose to. So I don't think we're there yet as a society. I feel like that's the expectation, is that though we're going to tell these stories. So we want to get into a place where we don't have to tell these stories, but we can tell these stories.
I actually came from a writing comedy background, so I did stand-up. I wrote for my college comedy magazine, then I transitioned to The Onion, where I was a contributor for like 7 years, and throughout all that, there's like so much comedy about Asian stereotypes that was so, like, I don't want to be associated with any of that, and I went the whole other spectrum of like, I'm never going to talk about anything being Asian American, and then I realized that was also a box that I was putting myself in, so it was like, how do I talk about my experiences but not have it be lost in the pool or fall into the trap of the stereotypes or the same kind of stories that are pervasive in the media. So that has really helped me in exploring the dynamics of my own documentary and how do I expand, what are the, what's the fruit to grab from the tree of the story? Like, it could just be praising my participant, but I want to explore, and I've told her this, like, I want to show that you're not just a basketball player, you're a human being, and you have all these complicated things about your life. You're messy, and it's like, I want to show that. And she was willing, so I think that's helpful to break that mold.
I would say, for me, I think that most of my life I've felt the need to over-explain Iran to people. I can't tell you how many times that someone has, the trips that I've gone to Iran, some of my friends were authentically surprised that I wasn't beheaded by my family there for not being Muslim. And so then I feel like I have to take them down a whole history lesson, starting with the 1953 coup, and just have a little booklet, like a little PowerPoint ready. So I think that's been, I tried to get away from that. I don't want to be trapped into that. And at the same time, I'm still sort of unpacking this in the work that I'm doing now, but to some degree, like, that's why I'm interested in just blurred lines of identity. And I don't think anyone, regardless of where they come from, likes to be put into a box. And I feel like I've had to explain similar things about growing up in rural Arkansas to people that have certain ideas about what it is and what it's about. And so I've found that blurring those lines it's been pretty therapeutic for me, to be honest with you, and just to kind of lean into that and accept it. Like, I do own a shotgun rifle and a 4-wheel drive, and I can skin a buck and run a trot line, and I'm also spend a lot of time with my Muslim family in Iran, and I, make a lot of Persian food and celebrate the Iranian holidays, and I'm okay with doing both. I'm not going to apologize for either one. I think that's both of who I am, and I think it's important for people to explore that within themselves, because everybody, like, I didn't even know about Farihah, that she had grown up in overseas and then came back to the U.S. Like, that's a whole unique perspective, and I think I'm exploring being more comfortable with that.
I think the stories that I explore tend to be things that I'm either pissed off about or that I'm trying to understand and puzzle through. And I never really intended to do this, but I've realized that all of the films that I've directed have touched on the Korean War. And, I've come to realize that this is like the singular trauma of of my life, even though I didn't live through the war, but it's certainly the singular trauma of my generation and the generation that preceded me. And I think that, and also adoption. Adoption is something that I've explored in depth in 3 films. I'm making my 4th film in my adoption trilogy. And I want you to know that I'm diving deep into adoption because it's such a fascinating, multifaceted topic that can tell us so much about our world, our relationship to other people, our families, our identities, race, politics, wars. So anyway, that's those are my preoccupations.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what other people said. I think we can only kind of tell the stories that sort of are meaningful to us. And so similar to Deann, I'm really pissed off about this issue about the justice system. So that's the story I'm going to tell. And it's really the only stories that we can tell. I mean, the ones that are personal to us or that have meaning to us. So.
That. I do want to go ahead and invite folks, if you have any burning questions, I think we're going to queue up and invite folks to be able to ask them. But I have one more question, and again, I want to maybe zoom out a little bit. You all have had a chance to kind of share a little bit about kind of your personal entry point in terms of the identity forming, what kind of shapes your specific work and your craft, but would love to kind of think about this filmmaking ecosystem that we all exist in a little bit more. Just the title of this panel itself, does it feel limiting? And I think when I first looked at that, I had to kind of sit with that in terms of kind of the deficit language of it. But I was like, okay, let's look into this. So we've spent a lot of time today talking about narrative, right? What are the narratives that are being told about Asian Americans? Who are these stories being told for? Who are the folks that could decide what stories are being told and what films are being funded? So from your perspective, in terms of the space that we all exist in, how can we better lean on our experiences to be able to help shape narratives about being Asian American that are a lot of what you all have shared, that are more inclusive, that are more nuanced, that are truly stories that are for us and by us? So we'd love to hear if you all kind of speak to that.
I can start.
Sure. Jason and then
So I think it really comes from, as you both said, it really comes from a personal place. So I think that if we tell our own stories, that's an authentic place to start, and that's where I think that things are headed. Like a lot of the films that are going to be here really start from that place. So that's the way that we're going, and that's the way we should continue.
For myself, I'm just from my experience, I'm like full of contradictions and multitudes. I touch a lot of different communities, I feel like, and that's what I'm interested in exploring with the Asian American narratives, because I feel like I felt the depths of grief with my mom passing like a month before I found EJ, and that opened me up more and opened my heart up more to people, and not just assuming having assumptions about like what their lives are, what is complicated about them, what is unlikable about them, what are their flaws. And that feels deeply human to me, to explore those things. And I wish we can see more of that in Asian American media, that we're fucking messy. And our older generation can be racist, and there's like complicated narratives, complicated relationships between Asian and Black communities, and all this stuff that I want to dig deep into the mud of all that, because I felt like I come from that dirty mud.
So you want to see more of that dirty mud?
Oh yeah, just pour it all over me.
I'm glad to hear you talk about how sometimes in trying to overcome certain stereotypes, you get pushed into others because you're overcompensating. Hearing you talk about, having to over-explain as opposed to just be in that space. And ultimately, that's what we actually want. It's not to have to announce yourself as an Asian American person every time you make a film, but that the perspective is integrated, and it's okay not to understand everything. And I think people who come from a dominant culture maybe aren't used to that. I remember being in a meeting with the funder. This was a film that they had already funded, and I was getting notes, and it's about the Latina community in this particular place in Texas, and there's a moment where this girl says it's been a really long time since a Latina woman has been elected for this position. It's been 10 years, and she cries. And they said, it's the only brown person in the room, they said, I don't understand why she's crying. Does she explain? Can you ask her to explain? Could you maybe go back and have her do a voiceover to explain why she's crying? And I had to collect myself and say, I think what you're saying is that you're presuming an audience that looks like you, and you're presuming a white, middle class, mostly straight audience, and I don't want to only make work that presumes that audience. So when we talk about the ecosystem, yes, there's work that we can do and work that we can push for, but there should also be a shift in the support system for artists as well, to know that we exist, this audience exists and shouldn't be excluded or forgotten, and that we shouldn't have to define ourselves either with or against dominant culture.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, to dovetail off of what Farihah and Jason just said, I think I'm interested in just seeing work, how, I think about how myself as a first generation Iranian American and other halfies that I'm friends with, that one of my friends, Sierra, she had her film Junam premiered at Sundance this year. It's a beautiful film if you haven't seen it. We talk once a month about our experience and how there's just this there's an evolution within our cult. We can have both of that. We can be this ethereal mess of culture, and it's okay. We don't have to delineate of I'm exactly this or exactly that. It can be more of a muddy, ethereal mess, and that's what I would like to see more of. I love the projects. I love the films that do that, and that's kind of what moves me as a creator right now.
Wow. I've been thinking a lot about narrative shift. I know that CAAM has been as well. We're in alignment. I think I see my work moving more toward seeing the Asian American experience within the context of U.S. imperialism and increased U.S. militarism overseas, and how U.S. foreign policy impacts our experience as Asian people here in the United States and domestic race relations. And, we're at a point where we're sort of at the dawn of a potential new Cold War, both in Europe and in Asia, and where the security architecture is rapidly changing. And looking at specifically the Asia and the Pacific, it's really frightening what might happen. And if we do enter a war, God forbid, in Asia, whether it's China or North Korea, we as Asian people in the US are going to feel the impact of that severely in terms of attitudes toward Asian people in the United States, whether it's anti-China, anti-Asian violence. And I think as storytellers, it's incumbent on us to really think about how we're going to handle that, because it's also going to be potentially divisive within the Asian communities, our various Asian communities. So when we think about expanding the narrative and talking about how do we increase nuance and understanding in our storytelling, we really have to dig into an expansive version of our history and look at the ways in which the U.S. wars in Asia have impacted our communities and continue to impact our communities. And I think we have to be really thinking ahead about how can we create stories and narratives that build bridges, that bring out our commonalities, and that create solidarities in times of crisis. And I think that this scenario is not that far off. So I hope we can all think about that and how we can bridge differences and create solidarities in this future Cold War.
I'll just say something really quick, and it just builds off of one thing Jason said. That, I mean, I just think that, you know, when I grew up, I didn't think of myself as Asian American. I just thought of myself, you know, as all of us did, as just human beings. And like ultimately, we all just want to make films where we're human beings, maybe Americans, but human beings. And we're going to tell Asian American stories sometimes, and because that's important. But ultimately, I just want to be judged as a human being, you know, telling a story that's important to me.
Thank you. Thank you for just this rich conversation and really unpacking not a very simple question in terms of the limitations as Asian American filmmakers and storytellers. I really would love to open up to the audience. I know that we've had a very full day, but I imagine that there are some questions that are maybe brewing in your mind that you want to ask this panel. So I think what we can do, if you just want to raise your hand, you can say aloud what your question is and I can paraphrase back. So anyone have any questions?
I wanted to open this up as a potential thought, like how do we as Asian American filmmakers, when, as Deann said, we have conflicts within each other or like opinions come out where some filmmakers who do get the opportunity to make big films feel like they have to announce and associate themselves with the dominant culture and further perpetuate the stereotypes of our community. And it makes me so fucking angry sometimes, but I just don't know how to process that anger other than feel like I should be supportive of an Asian American making a film, but here I am angry because they're just perpetuating the damn stereotypes of the white gaze and creating more problems versus actually trying to do some good. So I don't know, there's just anger and frustration around how best to process that. Of course I should process and just make my own films, but I have to now be like, well, look, even the Asian kid made that, so like all this white gaze, all these years wasn't doing anything wrong. So it's just, anyways, it's frustrating. So I was just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't think you have to support anybody. Yeah, if someone's like an asshole, I really don't care what their background is necessarily, but like I guess to the specificity of your question, I don't know what you should do. I think like should is a really difficult term in this context, but for myself, it's been helpful to like separate the idea of representation from these like broader goals for what I want the world to look like. So is it generally better for representation to see more Asian people on a screen? Yes. Do I think that some of those representations reify capitalist structure that I don't think is inherent in a lot of our shared cultural values? Also, yes. And it doesn't mean I have to like put my head down and just shut up and do the work, but it means like I can comment on that and on both of those things and hold both of those things and be like, happy to see more people at award shows and then also make the work that I want to make. But yes, it's going to be more frustrating. Anytime you're making something that works against what you're being told to do, it is going to be more difficult. So maybe it's like finding a support system that has values that align with yours for that support.
I guess I'll just add, I mean, this isn't so much about representation, but, I'm thinking again about sort of foreign policy and the way in which we might, as Asian people in the US, be impacted, and the disagreements politically that we have among ourselves, right? Because we are all from different countries. Some of our countries have not been friendly to each other in the past, et cetera. There's been colonization and et cetera. So, I'm hoping that there will be opportunities for us to, like this maybe, where we can have discussions and open conversations about our differences, and again, to try to find common ground. The film that I have in this festival, Crossings, which is playing tomorrow at 5:30 p.m., the Great Star Theater, just around the corner, I hope you'll come. It explores a complicated topic. It's about a group of women that go to North Korea and cross the DMZ into South Korea. And in many ways, they they cross the line in many different ways, politically, literally in terms of crossing the DMZ. And, a lot of the film is shot in North Korea, which is, considered this evil, country. It's the enemy state. And I think that it's been interesting to just have a discussion about that film because it's such a verboten topic to talk about North Korea at all. And it's very hard to mobilize any kind of empathy for peace with North Korea, to have actually an official peace agreement with North Korea. The conversations I've been having with that film as we've toured it around the country have been really good. People have not agreed. There have been a lot of differences, and I welcome it. I welcome those conversations because I feel like we need it. We need to educate ourselves about what our differences are so that we can find common ground. So I hope we'll have more opportunities like that for a variety of different subjects and just be aware to engage.
I was just wondering about your opinions of, you mentioned this narrative shift in America, and how we may be on the brink of a war, but also I personally noticed and seen the growing commodification of Asian import and culture, and I sometimes struggle with that because I feel like I'm being commodified, but also people say, any publicity is good publicity. If you can get your foot in the door by being the token Asian and then, change within. But, I kind of struggle with that notion, too, because I'm like, why should I reduce myself in order to, be in a space that is so limiting to me? So I was just wondering y'all's opinions.
Yeah, I personally feel that is total bullshit. So that's just my opinion. So I just think we don't need to conform, and we need to tell our own stories the way we authentically want to tell them. So yeah, that's just a simple story that needs to be told, but we should be the ones to tell our own stories.
As a Korean American, I grew up with my mom packing me Korean lunches, and then eventually I would throw it away because kids would make fun of it. And then 15 years later, I go to a farmer's market and there's a white guy trying to sell me kimchi and explain to me how to make it. I'm like, fuck out of here. So I feel that anger and stuff too. I've been the token Asian in comedy rooms and stuff, and there's so much pressure there because they all look to you for that. But it's their pressure. I don't need, I've had to be I'm not going to conform to that. I'm not going to explain everything to you. That's not my job. I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to tell my story that's truthful to me. And yeah.
If you feel you're being seen as a token person in the room, it doesn't mean you are. You know that you're not, and you can choose to respond to that how you want. If for you it is beneficial or it's not impacting you so deeply in that space where you're like, okay, I can get through this because I have these goals, then do that. I don't think you're failing the community in any way by putting your work forward in the way that you need to, but you don't need to, as you know, I think, you don't need to change to be the person they're expecting you to be. And also, if it feels bad in that room, leave. You don't deserve it.
Any other questions? I thought I saw a hand. Yeah.
Hi. So I was thinking, for example, North Korea, South Korea issue. Now we have Crash Landing on Love or in Love on Netflix, and that kind of melts the tension a little bit because we get to see. Imagine from the Southern perspective, perhaps, but also we get to see Indian dramas or like, I don't know much about the Iranian, but there's like even Nollywood's available on Netflix. So I just wonder, as a creator, those, like increase of the work from the actual countries out there, does it change the way that you portray, Asian American experience, or how does it affect your film?
Is that the one where they hang glide
Yeah.
into North Korea? That's crazy.
It's a very literal title.
Yeah.
I'm glad you raised K-dramas, because that's how I survived the pandemic, watching K-dramas, Crash Landing on You, among many others, like many, many others. I'm ashamed to say, but I hope you don't judge me. I don't know that it's changed the way that I make films yet, but I've been watching a lot of Korean dramas. And at the exclusion of almost everything else. Like, I literally do not want to watch anything else. And I think part of it is because I was raised in a white family, white community. I grew up on the television of, the 70s and 80s. And I think, Doreen Kondo, who's a USC professor, who's in the theater department, she talks about racial spectatorship, where these the shows that we watch tend to kind of confirm and perpetuate white supremacy. And as spectators, we watch this stuff that we're uncomfortable with as people of color, and feel this kind of rage, right? And I think I felt a lot of that as a kid without ever having an outlet for expressing it. And maybe that's partly why I entered filmmaking. But what the Korean dramas have shown me is that it's really possible to have an all Asian cast that, of really diverse stories. People who are funny, sexy, evil, good, romance, comedy, so many different types of stories. And I love it. I watch the most vacuous stories, and I love every minute of it. It's horrible, and I love it. I don't know what to say, but I do feel a shift, because I think that I have been so conditioned. When I watch, mainstream American films, I'm always waiting for, okay, who's the first, character of color they're going to kill off first, and what's the positionality of all of the different, characters in terms of their, relationship to different representation. And I'm always just on edge, right? And there's other problems with Korean drama for sure, patriarchy, sexism, et cetera. But there's a shift that I'm feeling inside of me, having watched a lot of Asian Korean faces for some reason. I can't quite explain it, but I'll think about it more.
Any other questions? Yeah. Do you want the mic?
Sort of from, so the context of being from New Zealand, or Aotearoa, New Zealand, and how, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, I can just walk up closer. So my question's just from the context of being from Aotearoa, New Zealand, where we see kind of our struggles as Asians being tied to the history of systemic racism and colonisation of the country and the colonisation of the Indigenous people. And I was just wondering and we kind of see that our struggles can't be divorced from that struggle, and how we have to fight for kind of that, for Indigenous people, the Māori people, to have self-determination. And I was wondering, in the American context, like, how much do you see Asian American struggles as tied to Indigenous or First Nations struggles here, and how much like that solidarity happens between Pacific Island communities and Black communities and Indigenous and First Nations communities? Or is it quite like, do people, are most filmmakers here kind of focused on your own struggles? Not sure if that made sense, but kind of, solidarity.
It's interesting, because I think I just watched Fricho Lee, the film, and having been in the justice system and worked in the justice system, looking at that film and realizing that I wasn't actually including the Asian American community in my view of what the criminal justice system looked like. Actually, just watching that film changed my whole view of the justice system, even though I'd worked in the justice system for so long. And so I think we do have the solidarity, and sometimes we don't see it, and sometimes we do see it. But from my perspective, from looking at my film and my work, I've been looking at mainly from the perspective of African American people who face a lot of injustices in the justice system. But now I'm seeing our connection to those injustices.
All right. Well, I've been told that we need to go ahead and wrap it up. I do want to kind of leave because this is really the first opportunity that the CAAM Fellowship has had a chance to be really forward-facing, to be able to kind of share your stories, your truths, what you're working on. Started in 2011, revamped in 2019, and here we are now. Before we close out, I would love to actually hear from each of you as you come into this fellowship. What's one thing that you want to receive from the fellowship, and then one thing that you want to give?
Okay. So we should answer, or the... Okay, one thing that I want to receive, I think one thing I would want to receive from being a mentor would really just, I think, to be able to give good advice and then also give good mentorship. So that I think is my goal. And what's the other? What do you want to receive from the fellowship? Yeah, that's what I said. I want to give.
Yeah, I have the pleasure of being able to work with Jason, and I'm also already receiving such great advice from him as a first-time filmmaker, as someone in a second career doing filmmaking. So I'm just really excited to be here at the festival because I've never actually been ever to a film festival, so this is really exciting for me. So I'm receiving a lot already. In terms of giving, I am a filmmaker who's privately funded my film, and so if anyone ever wants to talk about poor Jason, I talked his ear off about private funding. So if anyone ever wants to hear about that within the group or from anyone else, I'd always be happy to do that.
Suja knows some people who can give money. So I would love to receive, one thing I love about these fellowships is receiving the community aspect of it. It's such a difficult process, so to have people who have been through it, who are going through it, that's really wonderful. And I want to give that as well. Like, that's why I want to be there for my fellows and ask mentors about their projects and whatnot, and just be a sponge.
I also run a fellowship program for an organization called Brown Girls Doc Mafia, and what I, hey members, what I get out of that and this, I think, is more work. That I need your work. I need your work to exist, and I know it can be hard to get it out there, and it makes me feel so good every time one of you succeeds and finishes your film. And I also think that, I've spent years just amassing so much resentment and anger. And it's really nice to have a productive and very concrete place to put that and be like, I can make one, I can't do everything, but with Andy, I can maybe make one or two things a little bit easier for you, and that makes me feel so much better. So thanks for that. What I want to give is just the support and ear and vote of confidence that we all need sometimes.
I think the thing that I would want to receive is just outside perspective. Making a personal film, I've just learned how invaluable that is to have an outside perspectives. And I'm currently based in Arkansas where I'm filming, and so I also don't have the normal film community that I had when I lived in New Orleans. So it's pretty much a silo. So I really value the fellowship and the community, and just being able to communicate regularly with Farihah. It's been invaluable for me. I think what I'd like to give is just, reciprocity, really. I mean, that's just the, I recognize that we all bring something different to the table, and so if there's something in my own experience or skill set that I can offer to any of them. I know Jason's going to be filming in Little Rock at some point later for his film, so I'm, eager to host him, help him out. I'm a DP as my job if he needs help. So those types of things are nice too.
Yeah, I think ditto what everybody said. I'm not sure what I can give, but I will try my best. And in terms of receiving, I already feel like I'm receiving the community of CAAM and others. So yeah, it's great.
Beautiful. Well, you all are brilliant. Thank you so much. Can we get a round of applause for the CAAM Fellowship? Thank you.